Banners of Peace Podcast, Lecture 2. In this session, I will be discussing the nature of suffering. In today's world, when we look around us, we have been conditioned to not feel compassion for those around us. It's difficult because we are so preoccupied by our self-interests, by our goals, by our selfish glorification of these identities that we're trying to socially validate and socially glorify, perhaps. Thus, the narrative we have chosen to live through is causing a burden for our growth. Now, it takes a very special kind of person to take a step back, take a deep breath, and truly see themselves, truly analyze themselves with utmost honesty. For when you do that, when you analyze yourself with utmost honesty, it is not an entertaining and enjoyable experience, because you would have to confront the notion that you perhaps were functioning in a wrong way, that perhaps in some aspects of your life, in some aspects of your operation as this being that you are not taking into consideration those around you. Now, this, for many of us, is actually more difficult to consider and fix. We have been so conditioned by our environments, by the media, and I don't want to blame fingers. I don't want to create a bad guy, good guy scenario. I'm just saying that there has been an unnecessary conditioning of our worldview, of our inspirations, core inspirations towards our operations in life, where we think that it's difficult to consider others in our behavior. And what this means is that when you go into society, when you're trying to talk to the people around you, are you able to put yourself in their shoes and think about how they may be experiencing you? Perhaps you're using your creativity in many ways. Okay, on a side note, then perhaps use it to imagine how others are experiencing you. Empathy. Try to feel and see from the eyes of those around you, those you interact with, if you are a blessing in their life or a burden. For me, this was a very difficult process because initially I glorified my selfishness, and I was so conditioned by these impulsive habits or habits of impulse where I would just be taken over by my selfishness. And whenever I was wrong and I was being told that I was wrong, I would go on the defensive. And since I was creative, since I was intelligent enough, I would debate that issue. I would turn it into a whole thing and then just be like, no, see, this is why I'm right. And I'd get my way and I'd prove my rightness. Even though somewhere deep down inside me, I knew I was wrong. I knew that I was the one who was ignorant and had to be defeated in that scenario. And the victory that I attained through proving this rightness of mine, perhaps I could outsmart the other person, okay? But it didn't feel good. And that's when I realized that I was just fooling myself. So, when analyzing your suffering and the suffering of others, when analyzing whether you're a blessing or a burden to others, You must you must be strong enough, muster the strength and honesty to be able to accept when you're wrong. And when you're wrong, you're wrong. And that there needs to be actions or perhaps words said to fix that. Because the subtle motive, the underlying motive of existence is to grow in love, to grow in peace. It's that, for real. And those who do not see it, those who perhaps know it and do not think it's cool enough, those who are conditioned not to acknowledge it, they will create a lot of unnecessary bullshit and unnecessary drama in their lives, which they will be burdened by, and they will burden others, and then they will complain that the quality of my life is not good enough. Where they had to ask, where was my responsibility? Where was my responsibility in conducting myself? I may have the knowledge and wisdom to know that, okay, I'm a good person. I might deep down inside feel like, oh my God, I'm special. I'm good. I'm part of the good nature of existence. Sure, but is that aligned to your actions and behaviors towards others? Because deep down inside, you know that what matters is, let's say that from the beginning you were born, your life movie began. And every second, everything that you're doing is being recorded. Deep in your mind, you think you're isolated from this. And an aspect of you, the spirit, is. It is beyond life, and it is the selfless observer. But there is an aspect of you, which is the persona and the identity. Now, the persona and identity is going through life, and its experiences, its interactions, it's almost like it cannot take it back. It literally cannot take it back. It's like as time goes by, it's like, okay, this has happened. So existence as a whole is recording that for you in your life movie, okay? So this is an analogy that I would like to use. Now, have you ever had a moment where, I think a lot of people can relate to this, where, you're just kind of just normally chilling, and then you just think about a cringe moment or a regretful moment you had in the past, and it just like bugs you. And you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I said that, all that stuff. Because now you're realizing that it's like, okay, there's something that actually happened. So I engaged in some kind of awkwardness or wrongdoing, which was not decent. So now you're calm enough and peaceful enough to realize that. You're chill enough to realize that, okay? So what I want to do is let's avoid those regretful recalls of the past by being conscious of the present. The more conscious you are of the present, the more you can be a present upon this life, okay? And what that means is that there are people who put in effort to pay attention, not to only themselves, but those around them, and how they conduct themselves. And believe it or not, this is like a skill. This is something that grows by practice, so engage in it. Engage in good conduct. The more you practice good conduct, the better you will get at it, and then it will just cleanse your life. This is very important, okay? So, in my personal spiritual process, I went through a kind of dreaming phase, okay? Where I would have all these dreams of different versions of me in parallel realities. So one, I was like very messed up and it was just terrible. One, I was very like better than me, the best version of me, and I wasn't that. So and it was funny because when I saw the dreams where I was the worst version of myself, and it was like a nightmare situation as being. When I woke up from that dream, I felt like amazing. I felt like, oh my God, when I look around my life, it's like everything's bright. okay? But when I had the dreams where I saw the best version of myself, the one version of me that was just so profoundly communicatively open, okay? Even beyond what I am now. And when I woke up, I was like a little gloomy. I was like, oh man. And having these dreams, just happening over and over again, it made me think about my reality in this situation of life, okay? And I remember in one of the books, so I have written several books, which will be published soon, but I remember writing a quote which said that it went through a lot of examination of the different versions of me to understand that the selfless version of me was the supreme version of me. Now, I don't want you to see this as like some mental comforting. I want you to understand that you as a being right now are capable and you can do many things, and how you're framing yourself in this life will determine to a great extent your experience. So to eradicate your internal ignorance within your framework as a being in general will eradicate the negative experiences that you allow or perhaps inspire to be manifested. So one of the things that I want to do is that, because I believe that everybody as spirit in truth is pure, wants all to be free, wants all to be loved, and wants to be loved as well. One wants to be included in that supreme love. And what that means is that within you right now is a liberated nature. And then there's all this unnecessary stuff around it. All these unnecessary patterns, all these patterns of behavior, all these unnecessary ideas, thoughts, frameworks, outlooks, okay? And the cool thing about this is that you can analyze this. You can sit back and fix this for yourself so that you can be a more cooperative, more enjoyable presence to those around you. See, when we look at the meaning of life, when you think about it, we're on this just big blue ball in space, just floating and just like orbiting at a remarkably fast speed. And it's like, okay, as human beings, where do we find the meaning in life? And it comes down to, for the most part, for many, and I'm not saying this is the full of it, but I'm just saying for the most part, it boils down to our interactions and relationships with others, how we're acknowledged by others, and how we acknowledge ourselves overall. Now, this itself can branch out into a very big topic, okay? But what I want to say, what I want to focus on, is the liberating presence that is the witness here right now. And a lot of religions, spiritual paths that have been given by, I'm going to say, other banners of peace. In other words, people who've set up their banner of peace, and it has occurred naturally, and they had a good intention towards the world, and they became great spiritual teachers, just beautiful people, right? And these people, the paths that they gave, whether they were prophets, saints, or enlightened disciples, just waiting to realize it, whatever, they were trying to say that our ignorance is mostly, the ignorance that is causing the suffering outside is mostly due to the internal ignorance we have assumed. In other words, it is going within. Now, the thing is, see, a lot of these gurus lately, they glorify the concept of going within. You gotta look inside. You know, and then you have all these people from, I guess like tourists to these places, spiritual places and communities, and and they're like, what do I do? My life is a mess. It's like, look within, and the person just sits down. It's like, how do I look within? What do you mean? In other words, you're already what you are, okay? And with look within, to translate it, means that it means eradicate the ignorance so that the reality present is fully revealed. In other words, eradicate the unnecessary, which is one of my teachings here. I'm just trying to catalyze the process. And eradicate the unnecessary. What it means is be honest. And when you engage in being honest, and to a lot of people, I gotta say, being honest, people want to be honest so they're acknowledged for their honesty. I've seen many people do this, but the true person who wants to be honest is inspired by the motive that there's a greater reality here, there's a greater sense of freedom here, and that as long as I'm lying to myself, I cannot realize it, for it's already here. And it's a very interesting vibe, and it almost adds a spiritual tone to your living, where you realize that perhaps the reason why, even for those who are depressed, the reason why everything seems gloomy, everything sucks for me, is because I haven't been paying enough attention and I've been distracted by the unnecessary. And it's very interesting, because then you realize that I gotta be sincere, not with myself and with others. And those who engage in the path of sincerity, they realize a kind of subtle freedom creeping in, kind of just coming about. And they get addicted to it almost, because it's like, oh my God, I'm not being a machine. I'm not being a conditioned robot, a photocopy. I'm being myself. And what was the thing that triggered that? It was simply my honesty with everything. Because then I began to take a good look at myself through that. And it is very joyous. And the joy of this, I think, is simultaneous with the liberation that the masters felt, the spiritual masters felt, in that profound meditation, where they understood that they're not just this awareness, but they are simultaneously the all-inclusive consciousness of it all. And this is an aspect, this is a part of polishing the intellect. And you know what they say about alchemy? Spiritual alchemy was a spiritual thing. It wasn't about, the shallow think that it was about turning impurified metals into gold. There was some process, okay? But there's a story, and this story is about a certain occurrence that happened in the Middle East back in the day, where there was this profound alchemist who had reached the state of turning impurified metals, like turning iron into gold. And he was walking in the street one day, and he sees this shoemaker, this beggar of a shoemaker, this old man who's just struggling and his life is hard, as he just sees it. And he sees that the guy is kind of hammering on shoes on this iron thing, right? And he goes up to him and he's like, you know what, let me do something for you. You seem like a very kind and peaceful person. And so he goes and through his alchemy, and a moment converts that iron stand that the shoemaker was using to gold. And he expected the gold maker to be surprised, to be blown away, but the shoemaker to be blown away by this, right? To be like, wow, you turned the iron stand into gold. But the shoemaker, this elderly man, just looks at this poet, looks at this great alchemist, and he's like, why did you do that? Why did you turn my iron stand into gold? And he's like, I'm trying to help you. This is a blessing for you. And he tells him, turn it back. And the alchemist just looks at him and he's like, I don't know how to turn it back. I just know how to turn it into gold. And then the shoemaker just like stares at him. And he takes the golden stand that was what he used to fix shoes on. He takes that golden stand and he converts it back to iron, proving that he was a far greater alchemist than the person who had thought was blessing him. And then that alchemist was just shocked looking at him. And he looks at him and he says that true alchemy is not converting iron into gold. True alchemy is deeper, it's spiritual. In other words, it's taking this impurity that we're burdened with, analyzing it through our peace, through our understanding, through wisdom, polishing the intellect to the point where it reaches gold. And gold here is not actual gold. Gold here is the liberation of spirituality, is the liberation of spirit. And even in ancient, I think the Upanishads said this, or in yogic texts, where they say that the purpose of man is not to be an animal, not to function in life like an animal that's just craving, but to turn the animal into man. In other words, to discipline ourselves from our just impulsive engagement in only what we desire, and to turn our persona, this intellect, this impure ego, into spirit, the greater liberated nature that has always been present from the dawn of time. And thus, I poeticized it as a great remembrance. And in one of my books I've read it, I've called it the dawn of spring. So, it is important to consider when we are wrong, to tackle our interactions with those around us honestly, to not glorify ourselves in ourselves to a point of ignorance where it becomes unnecessarily difficult to be honest with our existence, because we will always feel like we're kicked back, we feel like our hands are tied, when it doesn't need to be like that. And I cannot emphasize the importance of being honest. The person who's not being honest with themselves can far too easily be dishonest with those around them. But the person who is putting all their effort, almost as if in a great war, to just be completely honest with themselves, with every aspect, to confront all the things that would depress the selfish person, thus to transcend their selfishness and their depression simultaneously through their honesty. And the person who does this, they are not just an asset to the world, but they are being witnessed by existence as a whole and applauded silently. Therefore, my friends, therefore, my dear listeners of the Banners of Peace podcast, when I say raise your own banner of peace, what I am simultaneously saying is be honest with everything, because that is the only way you can attain self-realization eradicate the ignorance that is making you misunderstand many things aside the notion of your own truth here, right now. Right? It's beautiful. It's profound. There has been many beings in this existence, on this earth, who have been so honest with themselves and everybody that they began to see that there's a greater love here, there's a greater peace here, that they are that. And they lifted up their banners. And through that began a whole nother curriculum of beautiful lessons and enlightenment. And it's the evolution of your consciousness, of this awareness. And it is at its peak, the absorption into the all-inclusive consciousness, which in yogic doctrine, it has been called Sat Chit Ananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. But it is not a mental idol to be worshipped, to be attained, to be grasped. It is a dissolution, dissolve, a blissful and peaceful dissolve in your absolute liberation right here, right now. And the greatest tool for that is silence. That is why the yogis said silence. I'm going to end the podcast right here. The second lecture of the 2 Samadhi series.